Morning and welcome to Pot Up with Matthews in the Morning from the Crime Prevention Security System Studio. It's large enough to serve you, small enough to care. It's a Monday edition of the program. We got a great show lined up for you. We got Steve Russell from WRUF at the University of Florida, and in the second portion of the program, Lee McGriff will join us as well. But let's go ahead and kick this program off with Steve Russell joining us. Steve, good morning. You're joining us on the Titan MR hotline. How are you, Steve?
Hey, Shana, good morning. Doing great. Thank you.
Well, you know, Steve, we kind of had a little bit of sports start back yesterday. NASCAR started back. They had a little race there in Darlington, and then they had a little skins game on the PGA Tour. McElroy and Johnson defeated Wolf and Fowler. It was for COVID relief fund. But at least it seems like sports are getting back a little bit.
They are. And, you know, it kind of mirrors our society, Shane. You know, when is it too early or too late to come back and get things to, quote, normal? But I found myself watching golf yesterday. I watched a lot of that. And it was fun because I'm not a good golfer, and those guys looked very rusty. You could tell it had been a while, you know, since they played. But it's good, but it's still going to be a very slow process, and fans may not be around for a while.
Steve, you know, you're the dean of sports talk radio in the Gainesville area, and I just want to kind of talk about your background. You know, you grew up in New York as a youngster, and I'm curious because I don't even know the answer to this. You know, did you always want to get into journalism, be a broadcaster? And growing up in New York, I know Syracuse University has a very good journalism program. Were there any thoughts of going to Syracuse, or was it UF for you?
Yes, I did think of Syracuse until the cost. And then the cost said no. You know, my parents were divorced. You know, we weren't poor, but I mean, we didn't have a lot of money. And it was ironic that coming to Florida, Shane, was, you know, going out of state and paying out of state tuition for a year was less expensive than going to a school like Syracuse or Notre Dame or Penn State. You know, growing up in the Northeast, those were, you know, schools you wanted to go to. My high school baseball coach actually went to Florida, played for Coach Fuller, and he raved about the University of Florida, and he helped get me in school here, as did Coach Fuller. So that's how I got to Gainesville.
Talk a little bit about you're an avid baseball fan. You played baseball as well. And I know you played other sports, but what was it about baseball that you know you found the love of the game?
You know, when I was a kid, little, I just always had a ball in my hand and throwing it around, and I always wanted to pitch. And the reason why I wanted to pitch was because I thought it was the ultimate challenge. You know, you've got the ball in your hand. You know, you control things to a certain extent. It's you against the batter. You got to have help with your defense. But that always, even as a kid, I always wanted to do that. Now, I wasn't always successful. You know, Shane, you can be a quarterback and throw a pick once in a while. And certainly I didn't throw shutouts every time. But pitching always intrigued me. How to do it, what to throw, when to throw it. As I got older, I got taught more about that, and that was really fun.
You know, so you do a lot of the play-by-play of Gator baseball, as people know, with Jeff Cardozo. How long have you been doing that? And do you really? I know you've been a broadcaster for volleyball, women's basketball, softball. Is baseball your favorite sport to broadcast? If
Always has been, and because there's no clock. Not that the other sports aren't great. Now, you know, there's games when if they're 3 hours and 45 minutes and they drag on, you know, that can be, you know, tough at times. But to go to a ballpark and, you know, the grass has just been cut and, you know, fans are coming in and there's no clock, that's the beauty of it. And, you know, I just thought about this over the weekend, Shane. I have now seen parts of 6 decades of Gator baseball and Gator sports. And that blows my mind. But I can remember, you know, when the Keithlin Stadium was just, you know, Perry Field, and there was a hill in left field, and the bleachers were wooden. But, you know, most people remember the MAC, but I remember it before the MAC. A lot of good players for Florida and other players came through this place, no doubt.
Speaking of the MAC, I want to say, was it last weekend or 2 weekends ago, was supposed to be the final regular season series against Vanderbilt. And man, that probably would have been a heck of a series. Talk about a little bit about your memories of McKeithen Stadium. It's a shame that they're not able to actually, I guess the last game played in there, we lost to FSU, right?
Yeah, and that will always sting because Florida was having a terrific season. That was Florida's first and only loss. Now, who knows what would have happened from there. I guess what I remember is the total package, Shane, because, they did a terrific video remembrance of the MAC last night on social media. Very well done, but I think it glossed over Gator baseball pre-McKeithen Stadium. A lot of great players played here during those times. Championships were won. And I understand what Sully's done, and he deserves, every bit of credit. But Dave Fuller and Jay Bergman and Jack Ryan and Joe Arnold and Pat McMahon also, lent their success as coaches to the program. And I can't even begin to tell you the number of players. Everybody remembers the players now in the big leagues and the Brad Wilkersons and David Ecksteins. But, before that, Mark Sullivan and Ross Bumgarner and Mike Stanley, guys that made the big leagues that played at Florida. Al Rosen, way back in the day, played in the major league. So there's been a lot of baseball, good baseball here. And Shane, you know this from playing football. How about the competition? I mean, guys that came in here, Albert Bell, Frank Thomas, guys like that, seeing them play over the years, great stuff.
Speaking of the MAC, I mean, I know you've called thousands and thousands of games in that stadium. Is there one game that will always stand out in your mind that you'll remember forever?
I get asked that a lot, and I don't think there really is, at least not, one that I called. Now, the Langworthy homer, that got the Gators to the series, I was on the call. Jeff made that call, but I was doing the game with him. I mean, that's certainly memorable. I did not do the John Burke no-hitter, when basically it had rained and fans weren't there. And then as, he was pitching a no-hitter and it got later and later, fans actually came back to the ballpark, to see that. But there's just, I can't really think of one. I mean, getting to the World Series, getting to call a World Series game, I guess, would be the one. Going to Omaha, getting to do that, that probably is the best memory.
We're speaking with Steve Russell. You can hear his show on WRUF, ESPN Gainesville, called Sports Scene, 12 to 2, Monday through Friday. Been doing it for how many years, Steve?
22.
22. And I'm fortunate to join Steve for a pregame show for the Gators, and we also recap the games on Mondays. So, Steve, you've been doing interviews and interviewing athletes and all these famous people for so many years. What are some of the best interviews you've ever done?
Well, those are two categories, Shane. One, the first category is, people you've interviewed that you've admired. Growing up in New York, Mets, Jets, Knicks, Rangers. So, as a kid, if somebody said to me, when you grow up, you're going to be able to interview Mickey Mantle. You're going to be able to interview Tom Seaver. You're going to be able to interview Joe Namath, Roger Maris. Like, are you kidding me? So those, for me, when I got to interview them, was pretty special because as a kid, I'd have given anything to be able to, sit and talk to them, and I got a chance to do that. But I'll tell you somebody recently, Shane, that I have really gotten to know better, and that's Coach Spurrier. Didn't do a lot with him, but since we've done the podcast together, done a lot more with him. Not that I didn't know, he was terrific, but just getting to know him, but getting to know him a little bit better has been a lot of fun for me because he's always fun, he's always positive, and just getting to know him in recent years better has been a real blessing, been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was listening to your show not too long ago, Steve, and I know you're a huge New York Jets fan growing up in New York, and I heard an interview that you had, or maybe not even, I think it was a recent interview that you had with Joe Namath. That had to
Yeah,
be pretty cool to interview him.
it is. And, when somebody says to you, it's good to be with you again, Steve, it's good to be back or something. I mean, that just, I got goosebumps when he was doing that. Because again, you don't ever think, I grew up in a one high school town. The good news is we were close to New York City. We were 80 miles away, so we always got New York television and New York radio. And part of the reason I'm sitting here with you is because of Marv Albert. I've interviewed him before too, and it was fun, picking his brain, finding out how he did things. I mean, we loved Marv Albert growing up. That, his "and there it is," that kind of thing always stuck with us. So that interviewing athletes is great, but people that you kind of grew up admiring and getting a chance to talk to them, that's pretty good stuff.
We're speaking with Steve Russell on the Titan MR hotline from the Crime Prevention Security System Studios. Steve, you also have a love for music. At one time you had a show here in Gainesville that was dedicated towards music. Talk a little bit about your love for music.
That actually started at a really young age. My mom worked in a diner, an old-fashioned, New York State diner, had a jukebox in it. And my mom was a single parent from when I was about 5 years old, and sometimes she'd bring me to work. And I remember the guy's name. His name was Pi Haley, and he was the guy that put the records in the jukebox. He would take the records out, and whatever songs were out, he'd replace them. And my mom said to him one time, "Hey, do you mind if, I can get some of those old records?" And, he liked me for whatever the reason. So, he started giving my mom old 45s, and we had a record player, and, I put them on, and I just, for whatever the reason, liked music. Growing up, I used to listen to WABC because they would play the top 40, and just always liked music. And then when I got to school at Florida, a guy named Ronnie Ackerman was doing a show called Recollections, and I called him and asked if he needed any help. He said, sure. Met him, great guy. I pulled records for him when people would request stuff. And then when he left, I got trained and I inherited his show, and people called and wanted music, and that was a lot of fun. And I hope someday to do that again down the road.
Very cool. Steve, back to your pitching days. I'm curious, I don't think I've ever asked you this. Were you an overpowering type pitcher or more of a crafty guy like a Jamie Moyer, wheel and deal some stuff?
I was an okay pitcher. Up until about age 13, I threw pretty hard, and I could throw the ball by people. But I didn't grow a lot from like 13 to 17 or 18, and other people did. And so, the fastball that was throwing by people, all of a sudden was being hit in the gap someplace. So I had to learn to pitch differently. And I was never really taught how to pitch. I self-taught. And looking back, I had terrific coaches, but they were parents. And my high school coach, who again went to Florida, was only 26 years old when he became a head coach. He didn't know a lot and was not a pitcher. So I had to learn how to pitch on my own. I read books. I would, read anything I could get my hands on in terms of how to pitch and how to do it. And, that's helped me be a broadcaster because, there's different ways to get guys out. You can be Nolan Ryan and throw, 95 miles an hour, and you can be, as you said, Jamie Moyer and win 250 games. So there's no one way to do it.
Speaking of Steve Russell, you can follow him on Twitter at SteveRussell850. Last couple of things for you, Steve. I know you've coached a little bit of high school ball. You've coached the middle school. You've coached my son. Talk about your enjoyment of coaching young men.
Very little in life, Shane, gave me more pleasure than being a coach. And that's what I really am now. With our students in the journalism college, we basically coach them. And, to see a kid start out at a particular spot and then through his work, improve, get better, flourish. There's nothing better than that. I mean, certainly winning along the way helped. We had our share of, really good teams that won championships, but it's funny how life is. My high school coach, Vic Livacore, was, like I said, I think it was 26 when he started coaching. When I became the head coach at Eastside, Shane, guess what? I was 26 years old.
Wow.
Same age as him. And, you think you know stuff, but you don't. And it's only through hindsight that, you look back and, I wish now I could coach those kids again, knowing what I know now. I mean, it's the best I could, but you think you know things and you don't. But, that's probably the thing. I mean, look, I've had a great time broadcasting, a great time interviewing people and all that, but nothing has given me more pleasure than coaching young people and coaching our students. And, the Aaron Andrewses and the Laura Rutledges and, those are well known, but there's so many of other kids that are working for pro teams, that are working in television and working in social media. That makes me a proud papa. That makes me really, really light up.
No doubt about it. Well, Steve, so when are they deciding to basically take bulldozers to McKeithen Stadium? Do you know that?
Yeah, that's still going to go on as scheduled. And the irony of that is, you were mentioning about Vanderbilt being the last home series. Had Florida hosted a regional, it would have been played at the new ballpark. I mean, that's how close that new ballpark is. And for those who have not driven by it or seen it, it is comparable to anything in the United States. It is going to be a beautiful, beautiful place to play. And for fans, a lot more shade. But they're going to take the bulldozers here as scheduled. They're not going to do anything early. They've got a contract. And the reason they're not going to do that, Shane, is because if you start football construction early, if you finish on time, you'd finish in the middle of a season. And that's the last. They're not going to move a team in the middle of a season. So, they're going to I believe it's in August. They're going to start bulldozing, and then we'll get the football complex started.
So you said if we would have, which we would have made a regional, that would have been played at the new ballpark?
Yes.
You don't.
If Florida would have hosted. Yes.
I mean, I know that sounds great, but having not played in that ballpark, with your home team not being familiar with the surroundings, do you think that would have been I don't want to say an issue, but it seems like to me, you don't want to mess with things because McKeithen Stadium, you've been playing there for so many years, just finished the season out there. That would have been kind of weird to me.
Yeah, I mean, it has, I don't want to say a con to it, but I mean, obviously Florida would have gotten over there to practice,
yeah,
get used to the place. And look, that stadium is going to hold, 9,000 or 10,000 people. And can you imagine, for a regional, you can stuff, 5,500 maybe into McKeithen. Well, there with berms and what they've got in the outfield and, the seating and all that would have been a showcase. But is it a chance that, something could go wrong? You're not familiar with, the corners, how the ball plays, et cetera. Yeah, but I think overall, you want to showcase that new park and play in it and get more fans to watch your team.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of that park, is there any chance, because I know the governor here in the state of Florida said that professional sports teams are welcome to come here, any chance we get to see the Yankees and the Mariners play in the new ballpark?
Well, I think there's a chance just by what Scott Strickland has said, that the University of Florida is open to having pro teams play here. Now, does that mean just football? I mean, is it the O'Connell Center? Could NBA teams go in there? Could Major League Baseball teams go in a brand new ballpark? Now, part of me says I don't want that because I want the Gators to play in there first. But, I mean, if it's money, and here's the thing people don't understand. Even the best programs, Shane, in the SEC, are taking a financial hit here through all of this. There's no question of that. So what's one way to recoup that? Well, get teams to play here, use the field, pay for the privilege, and help recoup some money. So I certainly understand the sentiment Scott Strickland has.
Yeah. Last thing for you, Steve. I read where I think the athletic directors in the Southeastern Conference are supposed to vote this week about when allowing student athletes to come back to campus. And I want to say it's a June 1st date and maybe June 14th. What are your thoughts on that?
The vote's going to be Friday, and I think it's going to pass. But I think there will be very strict restrictions on who can do it, when can it be done, social distancing, all of that. I would be shocked if it didn't pass. And I think the reason is, one, everybody wants to have a college football season. I understand that. I'm one of those guys, Shane, when something like this happens, I err on the side of caution. And not only does it need to be safe for fans, it needs to be safe for the athletes too, and the trainers and the coaches and, all those people. So that, I'm sure, has been looked at. The athletic directors have had conference calls every single day of the week during the week with the SEC. So they've been all over this, trying to figure out, what the next best step is. So if I had to guess, I think this will pass, but I think it'll be very strict and very limited as to, who can go in there, what the use is, and definitely social distancing.
Well, Steve, appreciate you joining us. Stay safe, my man, and we'll talk to you soon.
Shaner, I'll always do this for you, my man. I appreciate you. Thank you.
All right, that's Steve Russell from WRUF ESPN Gainesville. You can check him out Monday through Friday from 12 to 2 on Sports Scene. We're going to take a time out here. When we come back, we're going to be joined by former Gator, color man on the radio, Gator Radio Network, Lee McGriff. You're watching and listening to Pot Up with Matthews in the Morning from the Crime Prevention Security System Studios. We'll be right back.
Time out! Time out! Hey! Time out! Time out! Time out! There we go. Good.
We want to take this moment to thank all our sponsors who keep the show going and pay the bills.
Let's give them something to cheer for now.
Our Gridiron sponsors are Crime Prevention Security, small enough to serve you, large enough to care. Titan MRI, Gainesville's only locally owned and operated MRI facility. Peachland Dentistry, Gator Nation's #1 choice for dentistry in Port Charlotte and surrounding areas. Area Rug Masters, your #1 choice for rug cleaning. And Pound Hurt, preferred personal injury attorneys.
Our touchdown sponsors are Campus USA Credit Union, Celebration Point Town Center, Tropical Smoothie Cafe, The Keys Grill and Piano Bar, The Digital Mortgage Guy, Adams Ribs, Cloud9 Spa, Gator Dominoes, Celebrate Primary Care, Center State Bank, Gator Bait Media, and Davis Chevrolet.
If you are interested in promoting your business on the show, you can visit our website, potupwithshane.com, and click on the Advertise button or call Freddie Wiebe at 352-284-3733.
Again, thank you for all the great businesses that support the show. Please remember, if you like what we are doing here, thank our sponsors and support the businesses that support us.
He's looking, still looking. He's going for the end zone. He's got a touchdown.
Welcome back. It's a Friday edition of Pot Up with Matthews in the Morning from the Crime Prevention Security System Studios, large enough to serve you, small enough to care. Celebration Point is where the Gators come to celebrate. With premium brands like Bass Pro Shop, Tommy Hilfiger, Hotel Indigo, Nike Medici's Regal Cinemas, and coming soon, the HBC's new restaurant, Spurrier's Gridiron Grill, and Bozer's Rooftop Bar. We will see you at Celebration Point, where the Gators come to celebrate. Our next guest on the Titan MRI Hotline has done a lot of celebrating in his career. We're going to welcome now to the show, Major Wright. Good morning, Major. How are you, buddy?
Good morning, Shane. How are you?
We're doing great, man. I tell you what, I've heard your interviews on a couple other shows, and it's been outstanding to learn about why you wrote this book. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. First of all, we're going to have people that tag a friend and follow our show on Facebook Live. You're going to give away an autographed copy of your book, Major Pain, to Welcome back to Pod Up with Matthews in the morning from the Crime Prevention Security System Studios, large enough to serve you, small enough to care. It's a Monday edition. I want to thank Steve Russell for joining us. Celebration Point is where the Gators come to celebrate with premium brands like Bass Pro Shop, Tommy Hilfiger, Hotel Indigo, Nike, Medici's, Regal Cinemas, and coming soon, the HBC's new restaurant, Spurrier's Gridiron Grill, and Visor's Rooftop Bar. We will see you at Celebration Point where the Gators come to celebrate. Well, this next guy has done a lot of celebrating as a dad, as a player, as an announcer. It's Lee McGriff, former Gator great, joining us now. Good morning, Lee. How are you?
Hey, Shane, you're getting really good at this. You can do the technology part. You can do the media part. You're getting good.
I don't know about the technology part, but Lee, we appreciate you joining us. Let's go back. I like to, when I get all the former players on here, I like to go back to their high school days. Long time ago as a Plant Panther, okay? You decide to walk on here at the University of Florida for Doug Dickey. Did you have any other opportunities to play elsewhere, or did you always want to be a Gator?
Shane, I wanted to play. College football was so clear to me when I was young, and I grew up a Gator. My dad was captain of the track team back in his day, and a lot of family were Gators. I grew up the whole Gator thing, and I actually thought that the Gators were going to sign me, but there was a coaching change between Ray Graves and Doug Dickey. And when Coach Dickey came in, he had a different idea of, and Coach Graves actually had given me some indications that I probably would get a scholarship. But as fate would have it, Coach Dickey came in, and I didn't exactly fit what he had in mind. And so at that point, you know how you are as a senior in high school with a lot of pride. I wanted to go somewhere, and almost thought I was going to sign with Auburn. Same with Richmond, the Richmond Spiders. And then looked like something might happen with Miami. And then there were small schools like Maryville and, those kinds of things. But when it all shook out, there I was in April, and I had 5 teammates that all signed scholarships. So that was like dying. I loved them, but it was killing me. You know how that goes when your buddies are signing and you're the one dog they don't want. So anyway, Coach Graves actually invited me up for the Orange and Blue game. And I went to the game, sat in the stands, and he sat with me after the game and said, "You know you're a Gator. You need to come here and walk on." And so that is what I wanted to do. That was, my heart was filled with that, but my pride was stung. But at that point, that was by far my best choice. And literally, thank God it played out that way. And I have to tell you, Shane, for years, I was embarrassed to be a walk-on. It's one of the most significant, prideful things in my life that I went through that experience, and it went how it went.
Yeah, I tell you, once you're my age and you look back and you know how they run all those stories on ESPN Game Day about how they reward the walk-ons different ways, their scholarship, surprise them. That to me is just one of the coolest things ever, because some of my best friends in my years at Florida were walk-ons. The time and the effort that because it's an uphill battle. And, I just have a lot of appreciation for walk-ons.
Well, and your son's going through it now.
Right.
But I tell you, one of the lessons you learn is you make up your own mind what matters to you, and you realize you may not be loved or particularly invited, but it's what you want to do, and you go after it. And for me, it changed my life, because I've gone about my life. Certainly I consider what other people think, but when it gets down to it, what do I want to do? And be damned, everybody else. And that, the root of that came from that walk-on experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's talk about your career. I'm not real familiar with what happened in the 70s here with the Gators. What's amazing to me is I read, Lee, in 1974, you were first team All-SEC wide receiver, and you led the dang SEC with receptions with 36 catches. That only takes a couple of games nowadays.
Well, Shane, it's interesting because Mick And the guys in the radio booth, they like to give me a fit about that sometimes. And in fact, I led the SEC 2 years in a row with 38 and 36.
Okay.
But there's been kind of a period of time, especially with Gator receivers over the last several years, those numbers in yardage and touchdowns, I'd have led this team. And, so the numbers kind of shifted from your time, but then you get LSU and then they blow it out of the water with the reception those guys have. But back in those days that, the Gators would throw the ball 15 to 20 times a game. But that wasn't so odd. That was kind of how football was played by most people. And it was run the ball, play defense, and then when you get in a down and distance situation that's too far to run the ball, you threw it. So it was always a crisis when we threw the ball. Every once in a while, they call a pass on first down and really fool them. So, but that was that era of football going through the mid-'60s probably to the late '70s. That's the way football was played.
We're speaking with Lee McGriff here on the Titan MR Hotline from the Crime Prevention Security System Studios. Lee, talk about, after you leave here, you go and you're with the Tampa Bay Bucks in their first season ever. What was that experience like?
Well, my first leaving school, I signed as a free agent with the Cowboys. And, of course, the Cowboys went to the Super Bowl that year. And I was in the last cut with Jim Zorn. Jim Zorn and I and a guy named Danny Kepley, who was a linebacker, were the last three guys cut off that team. So it broke my heart. My teammate was Burton Lawless and my roommate all through training camp, and I went out to Dallas early. And so I missed making that team by a breath. And then I finished that season with the World Football League, which was played, at the same time as the NFL. Mm-hmm. And then that league, things were going well for me in the World Football League, but then the league folded for financial reasons. So it was the following year that I signed with the Bucks. And, that was a bittersweet experience. I grew up in Tampa, so to be able to play for the Bucks was, was an extraordinary experience. And something I really wanted to do. And there were guys, Coach Spurrier was our quarterback, and there were Gators, and there were a lot of Southern Cal Trojans on that team because Coach McKay, I'm telling you, I probably met 50 of those guys came through training camp. And Shane, that training camp was over, I think it was 10 weeks. And there was a reunion a few years ago, honest to God, because they let the expansion teams, the Seahawks and the Bucks go to camp. And I'm telling you, when they had the reunion, Wayne Fox came, some of the other coaches was there, and I said, Wayne, do I remember this right, how long this training camp was? He said, you're exactly right. He said, it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life is go through that training camp. So, I was made the team. I was starter. But as training camp went so long, and back then there were no limits on 2-a-days or even 3-a-days if they wanted to do special teams. And Shane, they ran us ragged, but they bring in these other guys from other teams, whether they traded or had been cut, whose legs were fresh. And of course, the coaches would get excited like they were Olympic sprinters, and we had just been running and running and running. That training camp was brutal, and but made it through. And then, of course, in November, unexpectedly, I was released, and it broke my heart. I didn't see it coming. That's probably because I'm not very smart, but I didn't see it coming. And one of the most unique experiences about that Buck experience is when I was trying to decide what to do after my first year of being at the Cowboys and in the World Football League. The Bucks weren't my only choice of where to go, but that's where I wanted to go. And it got into the spring, and their general manager called and said, listen, Lee, if you're going to sign, you got to sign, or we got to move on. We can't keep waiting. And so I did. The reason I was waiting is because there was a rumor that Johnny McKay, Coach McKay's son, who was a wide receiver, and there was a lot about us that was similar in size and those kind of things. And I really didn't think that was very smart to be competing with the coach's son.
Mm-hmm.
So I signed. 2 weeks later, Johnny signed. So having been a walk-on and knowing how to go to practice and make every day a mission, that was very much a part of me. So I decided, okay, Johnny, I'm going to hate you. I'm going to get fuel from hating you. And I'd met him at the Senior Bowl, and you know how you do when you're playing. You know the other receivers around the country or the quarterbacks. And I'd check the paper on Sunday and see how Johnny was doing. And so here we were. So I was going to use that as fuel. Well, guess who my roommate was for 10 weeks in training camp? Johnny McKay. And as life would have it, we became friends. You live with somebody, there's always good about them. But that was unique and strange. And, of course, Coach McKay kept Johnny for a couple of years. And so anyway, bittersweet. Part of it, starting first game, being introduced with Coach Spurrier, running out on the field, playing, doing all that stuff with the Bucks was just almost too good to be true. And then I got my heart broken when they let me go.
Yeah, well, I've been cut many times myself. We got a text here on the Titan MR text line for you, Lee. John wants to know, what was your favorite, greatest moment as a Gator player?
Wow. You know, it sounds arrogant to say, well, there's a bunch of them. And not that I don't mean to be humble, or that there's probably two big ones. One of them was when Doug Dickey came in the shower after the freshman Georgia game, where I'd had one of the biggest games of my life. I had 10 catches, almost 200 yards in receiving, and 3 touchdowns. And that was our 4th or 5th freshman game back in the day when only freshmen could only play freshman games. That's when he offered me a scholarship. I was in the shower. He walked in the shower.
Wow.
Said, "You will get a scholarship this summer." That was pretty big. The other one is maybe the 4th down catch against Georgia in 1973 when we beat them. It was a 4th down play, and we were desperate. As I told you, that's when we'd throw it. We were desperate. And, you know, I've listened to the Buck Bellew, who makes me insane when he describes the Lindsey Scott play, because I was coaching then. And you know, we win that game, we got a good chance to win the conference. But the way he describes the crowd and the ground was shaking, well, I've always wanted to say, hey, Buck, in 1973, we experienced that on the other end, you know. And, of course, they went on to win the national championship. We didn't. But that was a big day, too. But, you know, just like you, there's other ones. And the whole experience was – it's what I always wanted to do is be a Gator, and I was. And so I can remember, Shane, honest to God, standing out on Florida field. It might be a timeout or something late in the game, had a good game, place was full, packed, and we knew we were going to win the game, and thinking, my God, I don't want to be anywhere on this earth but here.
Yeah, bringing up a good point. I remember, you know, all our games being on TV, and when you're standing in the huddle during those TV timeouts, you know, the stuff being said in the huddle that doesn't have anything to do with the game, you're looking around, it's a cool feeling. Talking about your coaching days, what made you want to become a coach?
Well, you know, the truth is I wanted to play like most guys. I wanted to play. I genuinely love to play. And I guess I had to prove that over and over, you know, because coaches never looked at me and said, oh, my God, we got to have that guy. They look at me and turn the other way, and I say, whoa, hold on. So playing was just a passion. And when it ended, I tried to go into business, and I could not get my heart and mind going in the right direction. I had to be back in football, back in sports. And so that just became crystal clear to me. I got to get in it. So when I made that gut-wrenching decision, and it was hard. I was had grown up in Tampa, and you know, Margie and I were in Tampa. We had Travis, so I had a little boy and a lot of responsibility, and had to figure out what to do. So to switch out of that business career in the insurance business and seeking a coaching career, my first opportunity was at FSU with Bobby Bowden. And I took it. And that was, I know Gator fans will cringe, but it was a fantastic experience. And after 1 year, then an opportunity came to come back to Florida. Doug Dickey was told by the president at the time if he was going to get one more opportunity to keep his job, he had to change his offense, and he had to make some coaching changes. And those coaching changes were Steve Spurrier and I. And Steve had never coached a day, and I'd coached 1 year. But to answer your question pointedly, I had to be in football. And if I couldn't play, then I wanted to coach. And that, too, was an extraordinary experience, as you know, to get a chance and come back and be a Gator coach and coach the position I played. And, you know Dwayne Dixon, and Dwayne Dixon was one of my players. Chris Collinsworth was actually Steve and I made the decision together to move him from quarterback. He was one of the highest recruiting quarterbacks in the country, running the option. And that's what football was doing a lot, and Florida was running the wishbone.
Yeah.
So when Steve got here, of course, we changed the offense, and I say we. I did it in concert with Steve. Steve was really the guy that drove it and made those decisions, and Coach Dickey let him do it. But Steve went through the spring with Chris and said he is not a quarterback. Well, that wasn't received real well by Coach Dickey and the staff because he was the prize quarterback recruit. Mm-hmm. Again, almost in the country. And Steve, you know how he presents things, but he said, twirling his hair, you think he can play receiver? Absolutely. Guy can run like the wind. If you can throw a ball, you can catch a ball. You might have to work at it, but if you can play catch, you can catch a ball. And he was a good basketball player in high school. So we went to work, and the latter part of the spring, and that's a whole other story, but he was a great player. Chris was, but there's a lot of guys, and I still remain close to them because that's a very special relationship, that coach-player relationship.
No doubt about it. We got another text here on the Titan MR hotline from Frank. Frank wants to know, what was your favorite series to play in? Was it against Georgia?
These go neck and neck, and for young people, they're going to scratch their head. Auburn was a huge game to me. So Auburn and Georgia, and back in those days, we played them back to back. And, Coach Spurrier doesn't make excuses when he talks about winning and losing, but it really was a rock in the Gators' shoe to have to play Auburn and Georgia, two big emotional games back to back like that. There was no open date. I absolutely love the Auburn game, but I absolutely love the Georgia game, and it's hard for me to separate those two. And by the way, in my junior year in 1973, Florida had never beaten Auburn at Auburn. We went up there and beat them. So that was, for me, that was a big deal that we went and beat Auburn up there, and then we beat them again our senior year. But that was a great rivalry. And when we played Auburn this past year, I had to, and I don't do this a lot, but before the game, I just went down on the field. I had to go feel that game again. Auburn guys are warming up. I walked down on the end of that field. That game was a big deal to Gator fans, and certainly was to me back in those days.
So what did you always want to get into broadcasting or doing the color? And I'm trying to remember, what year did you start? Because I know you started, and then when Travis played, you took some time off to be a dad, right? That's right.
And the answer is I had never had a thought about it. And believe it or not, I was a journalism major. So, not a broadcast major, but a journalism major. So I had some orientation towards it. But at the same time, I never even considered it. And one of my teammates, older, Fred Abbott, was the color guy at the time. And when I say at the time, I got out of coaching in 1983. And I just had no thought of going into broadcasting. And some things changed with Fred. And so I was approached in 1984 about doing the broadcast. Just came out of left field. I had never even considered it. So that's when I got started. And as you said, did it for about 10 years till it was Travis's time to play. And I had no aspirations to be in broadcasting on a full-time basis or make it a career. I did it for fun. And based on how they paid me, it needed to be for fun. And that's still true. So I got into it. It was a fun way to be connected to the game. But when Travis signed with the Gators, no, I'm not working at this. I'm going to be a dad. And so I took those years, and Travis redshirted. So that was 5 years. And to my surprise, they came back to me because they had other people doing the color part of the broadcast. And but then my son Britt signed with UCF. Mm-hmm. So I said, man, no, I followed Travis, I'm following Britt. So that was another 5 years. So it was 10 years. And when I said no, when Britt was playing, I thought, well, that's the end of that forever. And then to my surprise, it came back one more time.
Yeah, speaking of that, you got 4 great children, 2 girls, 2 boys, 2 really athletic kids. Talk a little bit about Britt first, who, as you said, played at UCF. And then let's talk about Travis, which, he's got a record that it's one of my favorite trivia questions of all time. What Gator receiver holds the single season yardage record? And it's Travis McGriff. People throw out all these other names, but they never pick Travis. Talk about their careers real quick.
Well, of course, Britt wanted to be, since you said to talk about Britt first, Britt played at PK Young, followed Travis. And like Travis, Britt was a quarterback in high school and played a little receiver from time to time. But Britt could throw the ball really well. He was mobile. So he played quarterback, played some defensive back. And he really wanted to come to Florida, just like the rest of us. But Coach Spurrier didn't offer him a scholarship, but wanted him to walk on. But Britt had an offer from UCF. And that was really, again, a push-pull, a pride thing. So he decided to go to UCF. And Britt had some really, really good moments at UCF and had some disappointing times, like most guys' careers are. Shane, your career, you show up as a great high school player and recruited, and then you found yourself in a deep dark hole, but then you came out of it, and then it was fantastic. But most guys go through some ups and downs, and fans don't really realize that. The guys who just have smooth sailing all the way through, that's a rarity. So Britt had a mixture of that, but was a 4-year letterman and played wide receiver at UCF, as well as he was a punt returner. And Travis, who started his high school career off, Britt's whole time was at PK Young under John Clifford, by the way, who was my teammate at Florida. John's older than me by 2 years, but wonderful guy, and has certainly at the time was the most creative high school coach around here. And so that's why we switched Travis, even though he's on some really good Buchholz teams. For Travis to be found, he needed to have gone a different place. He was playing quarterback at Buchholz in a wing T, and couldn't quite see what Travis could do in that wing T, even though he did well. And anyway, so Travis made a gut-wrenching decision to switch schools and go to PK in his junior year. And he played offense and defense and returned punts. And Terry Jackson was on his team. Robert Baker, if you remember Robert Baker, who played at Auburn, they had some really great athletes and had some great teams. And so he signed with Florida. And as a true freshman, he played in the first 3 games and caught some balls. And then at the last minute, Coach Spurrier and Shane, that his his freshman class of receivers, and I consider myself a connoisseur of receivers at Florida, going all the way back to Charlie Casey, seen them with my own eyes. Mm-hmm. That recruiting class that Travis was in was the greatest receiving group, in my opinion, in the history of Florida football. We're talking Riddell Anthony, Ike Hilliard, Jaquez Green, Travis, Nafis Karim, and Jamie Richardson. Mm-hmm. That's pretty good bunch of guys. And 5 out of that 6 all became starters at some point. So it started out Riddell, Ike, Travis, and Jaquez. The 4 of them were playing. Travis caught some balls, and then Coach Spurrier made the decision to redshirt Trav. So the next year, his true freshman year, he was playing a lot as the 4th and 5th receiver. And but again, Danny was lighting it up and throwing a lot to Ike and Riddell and a little bit to Jaquez. Travis was making some plays. Then his sophomore year, he was, in the mix with the top 2 or 3 guys and catching balls. And he and Jaquez were actually having a very similar year. And he blew out his ACL in practice after the Georgia game. And so that was in 1996, the national championship year. And so Travis and Jaquez, Ike and Riddell were the starters. Travis and Jaquez were the backup. That's the 4 receivers playing the majority of the time. So that was heartbreaking. And so Travis had to come off an ACL injury and come back for his junior year, which he ended up having a really good junior year and then an even bigger senior year.
Well, Lee, one last thing I want to ask you. You have a very successful insurance business here in town. Talk a little bit about that, but also you have been preaching Kyle Trask for many, many years, and it finally happened. And just talk briefly about, you're not surprised, but I think a lot of the Gator Nation was, but he just had a tremendous year last year.
He did, Shane, and Kyle's got quite a bit of what you have. He has a great sense of timing, a great sense of awareness. It's in him. You can teach him and he can learn all the specifics and nuances and reads and all that. And of course he does. But I saw him in his first practice. And just like you spent your life hanging around receivers. I bet you know what one looks like if he's good. And I spent my life hanging around quarterbacks. So I have a pretty strong opinion. And so when Kyle first got to Florida with Felipe, I went to the first practice because we'd kind of been in a desert with quarterbacks at that time, and these guys were coming in, and I went to see Felipe, but I'd heard about Kyle. So I'm watching him throw, and the minute I see Kyle Trask throw the ball, just his motion, the way it came out of his hand, and it stopped me. And he reminded me a little bit about John Reeves. And again, for younger people, John Reeves was an incredible drop back passer. And he was Coach Reeves when you were playing, wasn't he? Was he there yet?
Yep, he was my tight end coach.
So Coach Reeves can throw the ball. Mm-hmm. So, their motion's not the same, but there was just something about the way he carried himself. Anyway, so they're doing the drills. They get to 7-on-7, skeleton, we used to call it. And I know that Felipe and Kyle have some general orientation about the offense, but they don't know much. They're freshmen. They're really seniors in high school in their spring, and this is their first 7-on-7. I think Felipe threw about 5 interceptions. He just had a great physical presence, could knock down a wall throwing the ball, and did try to a lot. Kyle, he is completing every pass. And I see him one time where play, post, dig route, middle route, coming over the middle. And he drops back. He gets his feet twisted. And I'm watching him make all these throws. And the truth is, I know he's not just reading everything. He just throws it to the open guy, and they catch it. Mm-hmm. Kind of what the job gets down to. So anyway, he calls this play. They're wanting him either to hit the middle route or check down. With his right foot forward, he's a right-handed passer, so he's off balance. He hits the post for a touchdown. I just shook my head. He felt that. He just felt that. He knew the safety was coming. It was no great read. He did it. And Shane, every practice I ever watched him, that's how he was. He just threw it to open people, and they caught it. Nothing rattled him. They suppressed him over. It was like he was a walk-on. They pressed him down. You could watch his body language. He came to practice. He was after it, and he was always good. So whenever he's been into the game, he did it the year before, but he came into that Kentucky game, and my heart was pounding because I was pulling for him. And when he did what he did, no surprise. No surprise at all. That's who he is. Yep. And he's been that guy since the day he's been here. And I had to bite my tongue a long time because in the name of Shane Matthews, how could this guy not have been our quarterback all along? Because when you started playing, everybody, how come Shane wasn't the quarterback before? Well, coaches don't always make the best decisions, and right. They don't always see who the best player is. I bet the players could have picked him out, And anyway, Kyle's special. He's special, and football's important to him.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you joining the show today, Lee. We could have you for another hour because I didn't even get to the head ball coach stories. I know you have some great news. We're going to have you back on another time.
Anytime. Thank you, Shane. I enjoyed it.
Taking your time, but that's going to be a wrap for today's program. You've been watching and listening to Pod Up with Matthews in the Morning from the Crime Prevention Security System Studio. See you tomorrow.